I'd like to tell you a little bit about a project I'm working on right now in the Eocene of Turkey. It's an incredibly interesting time to work in this part of the world because due to plate tectonics and continental drift, the Turkey that we know today did not exist then. Instead, Turkey was either a large island in this giant sea called Tethys, or it might have been an archipelago of smaller islands that are all closely connected to each other. In any case, being able to look at island life in deep time is a very rare possibility in paleontology. But that's exactly what we're able to do in the Eocene of Turkey about 44 million years ago. The part of Turkey that we're working in is called the Pontide microcontinent. It's equal to about the northern third of Turkey today, just south of the Black Sea, north of the capital city of Ankara. The rocks that we look in are incredibly beautiful. They're multicolored, brightly colored rocks, alternating mudstones and sandstones. They were laid down in a small basin roughly 44 million years ago when the world was much warmer and wetter than it is today. So what we're trying to do is find out what kinds of animals lived on this island, and we were incredibly fortunate recently to find the very first Eocene primate to come from this part of the world. It's a tiny little specimen, but it's incredibly diagnostic. This is the lower jaw. It's the only specimen known of a 44 million year old primate in the whole area between what is today Switzerland and Pakistan. So I think this lets you know that this fossil fills a huge geographical gap of what we know about primate evolution in this part of the world. It's an incredibly interesting specimen. When we look at little details of the tooth morphology of these early fossil mammals and primates in particular, it turns out that tooth morphology functions a lot like a fingerprint at a crime scene. We can tell exactly what kind of species this primate is based on the details of its tooth morphology, and we can even reconstruct where this animal fits on the evolutionary tree of primates. That then is a way that we can reconstruct where this animal came from and how it got to be on this island in the Tethys Sea. So we're pretty confident that Nizomomes was able to reach the Pontide microcontinent by rafting across the Tethys Sea from the adjacent Asian mainland, which would have probably been maybe around 400 miles away at that time. We have named this fossil primate Nizomomes bunadens. Nizomomes literally means island omomes. So it's omomes is a primate of about the same age from western North America, places like the Bridger Basin in Wyoming. And it turns out that American omomes is not a terribly distant cousin of this Turkish Nizomomes, which is one of the reasons we decided to name it that. The species name bunadens literally means low and very smooth cusped animal. So it's an animal that has teeth not that different from our own teeth in the sense that the cusps on the molars are very low crowned and rounded. Probably an animal that ate a lot of fruit in its diet. So far as we know, this was the only primate that was there. And unfortunately, after several million years of being an island, the animals that were living in this kind of island paradise in the Tethys Sea, as far as we can tell, all went extinct. Basically at the same time when the island got reconnected to the mainland of Eurasia and new kinds of animals came into the island from outside, and everything that was there before died either because of competition or predation. So for a few million years, northern Turkey was an island paradise in the Tethys Sea, and little primates like Nizomomes bunadens were living in the trees and eating ripe fruits. So most people that go on safari in Africa, some of the most amazing animals that you're thinking about seeing are going to be the big carnivores, things like lions, leopards, cheetahs, animals like that. I think a lot of people are surprised to know that these, even though we think of these as typical African mammals today, they are not truly long-distance native African mammals. They came there because of continental drift when Africa was formerly an island continent and finally collided with Eurasia. All of these African carnivores, or at least their ancestors, came into Africa from Eurasia at that point in time. So, at the beginning of the age of mammals, all of the predatory carnivorous mammals that were in Africa belonged to actually a different group called hyenodonts. Don't be confused with hyenas. They're not hyenas, they're hyenodonts. They're an extinct group of mammals that may or may not be fairly closely related to living true African carnivores. So a couple of years ago, my colleagues and I went in search of the oldest African carnivore, and we went to a place in Libya called Zella Oasis. Libya, of course, is a North African country. We were exploring some rocks in Libya near Zella, and we were incredibly lucky to find little teeth of what turns out to be the oldest African carnivore. This is an animal called Africertensis. The teeth are so tiny that we're going to take a look at them by micro-CT scanning in just a moment. But this is the oldest known African carnivore. It dates to about 31 million years ago, which is about 8 million years older than the second oldest African carnivore, Africertensis, a little weasel-like creature.
Hi, my name is Kristen Tietjen, and I'm a scientific illustrator with the BI working in the Beard Lab. A major part of my everyday work involves the creation of digital 3D models from micro-CT data. So I'll be giving a brief overview of how we go from a stack of CT images to a manipulable object. So this process is called segmentation, and there's a variety of software programs that one can use. I'll be demonstrating using materialized mimics. So to start, we take the fossils to a micro-CT facility to be scanned and receive a set of grayscale images to work with. There's something like this. This image stack is imported into Mimics, and from there we can start to render out our 3D models. So what we have here is a set of teeth from a newly described species we've named Africertensis. And we need to tell the program what information to render into a 3D model and what to ignore. And this is done with the creation of a mask. So if we go up here, it will generate this threshold that reads the grayscale value. And you just crop out the information you do not want it to pick up. Tell it OK. And we're going to work off of this one tooth. So we are going to isolate that one. And then we can go ahead and create an object. So now we have a 3D model of our tooth. For more complex models, you might need to edit the mask a bit more manually. This can be useful, especially if the model is still embedded in matrix, because this gives us a way to explore the data without destroying the original fossil. So now that we have this model, we can measure landmarks on it. And just go in here, and we measure distance and angle are primarily the ones that researchers would be concerned with. So we can just measure the distance between, let's say, these 2 points right here. And it will provide measurements. This makes it easy for researchers to perform morphometric analyses without access to the physical fossil, which is useful if the fossil isn't available for loan, especially in the case of something like a holotype, or if the researcher can't go to the physical museum where it's housed. From here, we can also upload this model into a storage bank, so other researchers can look at the fossil themselves, do their own analysis for their own work. So these teeth are actually available to download on Morphosource right now for anyone interested. We have a link to the tooth itself on Morphosource. There's access to the original series of CT data and the physical model.
Hi, I'm Matt. I'm a vertebrate paleontologist and PhD candidate at the University of Kansas. My interest is the early evolution of mammals, so between the extinction of the dinosaurs about 66 million years ago to the end of the Eocene about 34 million years ago. Most mammal paleontology during this time, we focus on isolated bits of the teeth and jaws because teeth are the most likely part of the mammal body to be preserved, like this tiny bit of a jaw with 3 teeth of an early primate. My particular interest is in the origins and early evolution and spread of bats. Bats are particularly interesting because the first fossils that we have in the record of them look like this. This is more or less a modern looking bat. It's got really long arms, relatively little tiny legs here. If we were to CT scan inside the skull of this species of bat, we would learn that its inner ear looks like it's able to echolocate. So when bats show up about 10 million years after the extinction of the dinosaurs, they look like this. So for all intents and purposes modern. They're absolutely capable of flying. My job is to try to investigate that 10 million years before bats show up and understand what type of animals they're coming from, how they developed these particularly unusual adaptations, and then also to see what's going on in the time after bats first show up, how they radiated, and how they ended up being this really diverse, really widespread group that we know of today. One of the challenges of studying bats is that their teeth are so small. And how do we even find them? So one of the ways that we do that is through a method called screen washing. Essentially, it's like panning for gold, but for fossils. All of the dirt fall through, and only the rocks of a particular size and fossils of a size that we're interested in remain. So we get a residue like this that we then put into bags or some other container and bring back to the museum where we can look through to find the fossils. And that part, we sit in a lab in front of a microscope and sort of pick through sediment like this very slowly so that we don't miss any fossils. When we find a fossil, we stop, we remove it, put it in a separate container, and then continue on. So then we can go through and identify fossils found that we couldn't see with our naked eye, including things as tiny as this little bat tooth. Now, it's not the piece of wax, it's the thing on top of the piece of wax. And so this is one of the type of fossils that we could typically find through screen washing. Again, most bats are going to fall in this size range. So most bat teeth are small, but occasionally we find a really interesting large specimen. So currently we're studying this one specimen. It's a single upper molar of a large bat from about 39 million years ago in northern Africa, the country of Libya. And so based on the various bumps and ridges on this tooth, we can identify it as a new species belonging to the already named genus Whitwadia. So this new species of Whitwadia, based on this single tooth, may not look particularly impressive, but even compared to the skull of a modern big brown bat, which is a common bat around here in Lawrence, Kansas, you can tell that this Libyan bat would have been gigantic. Based on some measurements and comparisons to living bat species, this may have had a wingspan on the scale of about 3 feet. So that's about as big as the biggest vertebrate predator bats that live today, things that eat other mammals and birds. Interestingly, this individual, we did a statistical analysis comparing the shape of the tooth with those of other living bats that eat a variety of different things. And it may be closer to living bats that subsist almost entirely on fish than anything else. So we need to do more analyses looking into that, but it's possible that this may be the earliest evidence of truly fish-eating bats that we have in the world. That's it from me. Hopefully you learned a lot about how we study the earliest bats, and hopefully you enjoyed it.
Hi, my name is Kathleen Rust, and I am a second-year PhD student here at KU.
My name is Kristen Miller, and I'm a second-year master's student.
We are both graduate students in Dr. Chris Beard's lab, and we both study early primate evolution.
We wanted to share with you some of the research we have been working on recently and how we've been able to still do this research in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic.
So, like most of the world, the pandemic has forced us to work from home, which means that we've really had to adjust how we continue to do our research. We've been able to set up our own home labs in order to carry out our research.
With that, we'd like to show you how we've been able to conduct our research at home and also show you some really fascinating North American fossil primates that are millions of years old. All right, so as we mentioned, we study the earliest primates. So primates is the mammalian order, which includes lemurs, monkeys, apes, and then humans, of course. So we look at the fossil record of primates. We primarily look at fossilized teeth. So the tough dental enamel kind of makes them ideal for preservation through long amounts of time. So those are kind of the main sort of anatomical features that we use to study primate evolution. So I study a group of mammals called Plesiodapiforms. So Plesiodapiforms aren't true primates, but they are closely related. So the ones that I study come from this Arctic environment from Ellesmere Island, which is up in Canada near Greenland. So modern day primates are found mostly in tropical regions around the equator, so we don't see primates in northern latitudes today, which is what makes the Ellesmere Island specimens so interesting, because we don't usually find them that far north. And while Ellesmere Island, about 53 million years ago, wouldn't have been quite as cold as it is today, it still would not have had that tropical environment that primates love today. So I can look at these specimens, especially their teeth, and I can understand kind of by looking at the dental topography, so kind of the shape, the relief of those teeth, to understand what they were eating up in that Arctic environment. So let me kind of show you some of these specimens of Plesiodapiforms. So we'll head over here. All right. So as you can see, these are just resin casts, so they're not the real fossils, so I can take them home and study them here. So this is one of the specimens that's found up in the Arctic. I've got two species, so this one's a little bit bigger. And then this one here is also from the Arctic. You can see it's just got two little teeth there. That one's going to be our smaller species. And then these two fossils over here, they are going to be sort of closely related species that are found in mid-latitudes of North America. So those are some of the primates that we would see early on in primate evolutionary history. And then now Kat is going to kind of show you some of the specimens that she's been working on that happen much later in primate evolution.
So similar to Kristen, my research also studies a lot of fossil teeth, but of some of the earliest true primates. So the fossils I study are considered primates of modern aspect. in that they possess all of the key features that we use to identify primates today, like grasping hands and feet and forward-facing eyes. So generally there are two groups of the earliest true primates that are recognized today. These are the Adapiforms, which are considered more lemur-like in their anatomy, and then the Omamaiforms, which are more tarsier-like in their anatomy. Now, Adapiforms and Omamaiforms appear in the fossil record in Asia, North America, and Europe roughly around 56 million years ago. And in North America, Adapiforms survived and were very successful for millions of years until their extinction roughly around 34 million years ago. So for several million years, Adapiform primates, kind of dominated the North American landscape, and there were several different families and genera and species. So they go extinct, these North American Adapiforms, around 34 million years ago. And then interestingly, there is a novel, random, kind of mysterious appearance of a new fossil primate. And this primate has been known to researchers since the 1960s, and it is referred to as Egamowichoshala. So roughly 6 million years after the extinction of the North American Adapiform primates, this new Adapiform primate, Egamowichoshala, a genus, is discovered. But it's really fascinating because given its appearance and timing in the fossil record, it is the oldest fossil primate before the arrival of our species in North America, Homo sapiens. Also interestingly is this primate species. Where did it come from? Was it a relic species or, remnant of a population of Adapiforms that existed earlier in North America? Or did it come from Asia or Europe or somewhere else? So I wanted to come and show you guys some of the known Egamowichoshala specimens that have been described. So this right here, Egamowichoshala, is highly unique in its dental morphology. So we look at all the bumps and crests and ridges of the teeth that really survive best in the fossil record, like Kristen said, because of their enamel. And we use all of these bumps and crests and grooves to kind of distinguish species from one another. So you can see here that we have a lower jaw with some premolars and molars, and right over here as well. And then over here we have a partial upper jaw, so a partial maxilla with some upper molars. And then over here we also have some molars of Egamowichoshala. So Egamowichoshala has been known to researchers, like I mentioned, since the 1960s, but it's been very hotly debated. A lot of researchers have debated really where Egamowichoshala falls on the primate family tree. In other words, what family of primates is Egamowichoshala most closely related to? So my advisor and I are currently working on describing this upper molar from Nebraska that has been only referred to in the literature, but we're hoping that our formal description of this upper molar and another analysis will help us understand where Egamowichoshala fits in the primate family tree.
Hey everybody, my name's Spencer and I'm a graduate student at KU studying vertebrate paleontology. And in honor of National Fossil Day, I wanted to talk to you guys about a really cool project that our team at KU recently completed and had published. And that project was describing this animal right here. Now, you're probably wondering, what is this thing that I'm holding? It probably doesn't look like any animal you're familiar with. And you'd be correct, because what I'm actually holding is just an isolated tooth of an animal that we've named Africertensis. And this tooth is actually a lower first molar. So if you look in your own mouth, about halfway back on each side of your lower jaw, you've also got a lower first molar, but it looks quite different than this one. This one actually has these nice sharp shearing crests in an almost V-shaped pattern right here at the top of the tooth. And what those crests do is they actually tell us something about what this animal might have been doing or might have been eating. So generally when you see these V-shaped crests in a lower molar, it means that the animal was most likely a carnivore, meaning it was a meat-eating animal. If we compare that to the molars in our own mouths, we don't see these same sorts of crests. That's because our diets involve a lot more variety. We aren't eating meat exclusively, or at least most of us aren't. And so our molars actually reflect the variety in our diet. Whereas an animal like this, you can tell its tooth was specialized just for the sole purpose of cutting meat and sort of tearing flesh. So if we look at this tooth, you might think that this belonged to a pretty big animal. If I hold this up to my own jaw, it's pretty clear that there's no way a tooth this size would have fit in my mouth, and so therefore the animal must have been much bigger than me. But actually, this is what I'm holding here is a 3D printed model of the actual specimen, the actual fossil itself, that has been magnified by about 10 times to make it easier to see and to hold and to look at. So that means the actual animal, Africertensis, was about 10 times smaller than this. So by modern day comparisons, we're talking about something roughly the size of a weasel or a mongoose. So if we look at the anatomy of this tooth, it's pretty clear that this animal belonged to a group of mammals known as carnivorans. These include pretty much all the meat-eating mammals we think of that are alive today, like dogs and cats, as well as lions and bears. But what's really cool about Africtus is that it actually comes from a time and place where carnivorans were not previously known. So Africtus comes from the country of Libya, which is in northern Africa, and it comes from a time period known as the Oligocene, which is about 30 million years ago. So during this time, Africa was an isolated island continent, which means it wasn't geographically connected to any other landmass. This isolation prohibited animals from moving into and out of the continent, and that means other carnivorans were not able to reach Africa up until about 10 million years later in a time period known as the Miocene. So given that really old age of Africtus, that currently makes this animal the oldest known carnivoran from Africa. So in addition to being a really cool animal, these fossils were collected under really interesting circumstances as well. So they were collected back in 2013, and during that time, Libya was not the safest place to be doing fieldwork due to all the political unrest that was taking place. And so these specimens actually had to be collected under the supervision of armed security guards. There were machine guns mounted in the back of the field vehicles. And so I was not there, but various other KU faculty members and graduate students were there to literally risk their lives to collect these fossils. And I think that just makes Africertensis even more special and makes it a really cool fossil to learn about on National Fossil Day.